Welcome, dear friends, to this gentle moment we share together. As the sun begins to set and the day slowly releases its hold on us, I invite you to settle into a comfortable space, perhaps with a warm cup of tea, and let your breathing naturally slow and deepen. Today, I want to share with you an ancient story that has been whispered through the valleys of wisdom for generations. It's a tale that begins in a forgotten corner of the world, where time moves like honey and children still run barefoot through the earth, their laughter mixing with the mountain breeze. But before we journey there together, let me ask you something. Have you ever received recognition for your hard work, perhaps a promotion, an award, or even just heartfelt praise from someone you respect? Do you remember that warm glow of being truly seen and appreciated? Most of us cherish these moments deeply, don't we? They feel like golden sunshine breaking through clouds. Yet here's what's curious about the human heart, and perhaps you've noticed this too. Sometimes the very things that lift us up can also become the chains that bind us. Sometimes our greatest rewards become our most beautiful prisons. And sometimes, what starts as a gift of love transforms into a burden we cannot set down. The Buddha taught us about attachment, about how our clinging to things, even wonderful things, can become the source of our deepest suffering. Today's story illuminates this teaching through the gentle eyes of a hardworking donkey who lived in a village much like the ones that still dot the hillsides of the world. This donkey's journey will take us through the landscape of the human heart, through the valleys of service and the mountains of recognition, through the shadows of exhaustion, and finally into the clear light of understanding. It's a story about work and rest, about being seen and being truly known, about the golden bells we carry and the moment we finally learn to set them down. So breathe with me now, let your shoulders drop just a little, and allow yourself to be carried into this ancient wisdom. Let's discover together what happens when love becomes attachment, when service becomes imprisonment, and how sometimes we must lose everything to find our true selves. In this village where our story unfolds, where the morning mist dances between ancient trees and the earth still holds the memory of countless seasons, there lived a gray donkey with the gentlest eyes you could imagine. His coat was the color of twilight clouds, soft and weathered, and his steps had that steady rhythm that speaks of a heart at peace with its purpose. Every morning, as the first golden threads of sunlight began to weave through the valley, this donkey would rise without being called. There was something beautiful about the way he moved, not rushed or anxious, but with the natural grace of someone who understood their place in the world. The villagers would watch him from their doorways, steam rising from their morning tea, and they would smile. There's something deeply comforting about witnessing pure dedication, isn't there? Day after day, season after season, he carried the burdens of the village, heavy sacks of grain that would feed families through winter, bundles of firewood that would keep homes warm, water vessels that would quench thirst during the dry months. His back was strong, his spirit willing, and most remarkably, he never complained. Not once did he bray in protest or refuse a load or drag his feet in reluctance. You know, when the Buddha spoke of right livelihood, I believe he was pointing toward this very quality we see in our donkey friend. Here was work performed not out of greed or ambition, not to impress others or accumulate wealth, but simply as a natural expression of service. The donkey didn't work to become someone special. He worked because work needed to be done, because others needed help, because this was his way of participating in the beautiful web of life that connected every creature in the village. There was no ego in his service, no keeping score of who owed him what. When children played around his feet as he walked, he stepped carefully to avoid them. When elderly villagers needed to rest against his side, he stood perfectly still, becoming a living pillar of support. When the path was muddy and difficult, he simply adapted, finding the safest way forward. The villagers began to say among themselves that he was the most valuable creature in their community, not because he was exotic or rare, but because his reliability had become the invisible foundation upon which so much of their daily life rested. The baker knew his flour would arrive each Tuesday. The miller trusted that grain would reach him by Thursday. The families in the hills counted on him to bring them supplies before the storms. But here's what was most beautiful about those early days. The donkey didn't know he was being praised. He didn't wake up each morning thinking about his reputation or wondering what others said about him. He simply rose with the sun, felt the earth beneath his hooves, and began his day's journey. There was a purity to his motivation that was almost childlike, almost sacred. His owner, a man respected throughout the village for his fairness and wisdom, would sometimes pause in his other work just to watch the donkey. There was something profound about witnessing such consistent dedication, such uncomplicating service. In a world where so many creatures and people seemed driven by restlessness or dissatisfaction, here was a being who had found his dharma and lived it completely. The Buddha taught that when we serve others without attachment to the fruits of our actions, we touch something eternal within ourselves. We become instruments of compassion in the world. In those golden days, our donkey friend embodied this teaching perfectly. Though he had never heard of Buddhism or meditation or any spiritual path at all, he simply lived what many of us spend years trying to learn. And in the evening, when his work was done, he would stand quietly in the pasture, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. Sometimes the village children would bring him tender grass or fresh water, not because he demanded it, but because his gentle presence inspired their natural kindness. Everything was in perfect balance. Everything was exactly as it should be. But as we know, dear friends, all things in this world are impermanent, and change was already walking up the mountain path toward this peaceful village, carrying with it a gift that would transform everything. One morning, when the dew still kissed the grass and the sky was painted in the softest shades of dawn, our donkey friend returned from a particularly long journey. His legs trembled slightly with fatigue, but his spirit remained steady, his steps still sure and purposeful. As he approached the familiar gate of his home, he noticed his owner waiting for him, arms crossed, wearing an expression that seemed both thoughtful and pleased. Without saying a word, the man walked toward the donkey, carrying something wrapped in a piece of soft, worn cloth. There was a ceremonial quality to his movements, a solemnity that made even the morning birds pause in their singing. Gently, almost reverently, he unwrapped the cloth to reveal something that caught the early sunlight and threw it back in dancing fragments of gold. It was a bell, dear friends. Not just any bell, but one crafted from the finest metal, polished until it gleamed like captured sunshine. The craftsmanship was exquisite, each curve perfect, each surface smooth as still water. When the light touched it, it seemed to hold warmth within its golden walls, as if it contained a piece of the sun itself. The owner's hands were gentle as he fastened the bell around the donkey's neck, the soft rope settling comfortably against the gray coat. As he stepped back, his face broke into a warm smile, the kind that reaches all the way to the eyes. "This is your reward," he said, his voice carrying the weight of genuine appreciation. "No one works as you do. This bell will be your emblem. Everyone will know that you are the best." Now, the donkey didn't fully understand the meaning of this ceremony, but something stirred within his heart. It was a feeling he had never experienced before, warm and expanding, like the first sip of sweet water after a long, dry journey. Was this what humans call pride? This golden warmth that seemed to fill his chest and make his steps feel lighter. As he took his first steps with the bell, it sang. Oh, what a sound it made, pure and clear, like liquid music flowing through the air. Each movement of his body created a gentle melody, a soft chiming that seemed to announce not just his presence, but his worth. The sound followed him like a faithful companion, marking his passage through the world with something that felt very much like celebration. The villagers began to notice immediately. Where once they had simply nodded respectfully as he passed, now they stopped their conversations to listen. Children would run to their windows when they heard the golden chiming, pressing their faces against the glass to catch a glimpse of the bell that danced with sunlight as he walked. "There goes the special donkey," they would whisper to each other, and their voices carried a note of awe that the donkey had never heard before. Something began to shift in our friend's experience of his work. The same paths he had walked countless times now felt different beneath his hooves. The same loads he had carried with quiet determination now seemed to have a soundtrack, a musical accompaniment that made each step feel significant, important, worthy of attention. The Buddha taught us about the arising of attachment, how even the most beautiful things can become the seeds of our suffering when we begin to cling to them. But in those early days with the golden bell, our donkey friend felt only the sweet intoxication of being truly seen, truly valued, truly recognized for his faithful service. He began to walk a little faster, to straighten his shoulders a little more. Not from vanity, but from something deeper, something that felt like finally being acknowledged for who he was and what he contributed to the world. Each chime of the bell seemed to say, "You matter. Your work has meaning. You are valuable." What none of them understood yet, not the donkey, not his owner, not the admiring villagers, was that this beautiful gift carried within it a profound teaching about the nature of identity and the subtle ways that even love can become a prison. The golden bell that sparkled so brilliantly in the sunlight was about to become something much heavier than its physical weight might suggest. As the days turned into weeks, something subtle but profound began to shift in our donkey friend's relationship with his work, his world, and most importantly, with himself. The golden bell, which had once felt like a celebration of his nature, gradually became the very definition of who he was allowed to be. The transformation didn't happen overnight, as these things rarely do. It crept in quietly, like morning mist filling a valley, so gradually that no one noticed until the whole landscape had changed. At first, The donkey simply enjoyed the music of his movement, the way the bell's song accompanied his familiar journeys. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the song began to change from a celebration into an expectation. You see, dear friends, his owner had grown accustomed to hearing that golden chime throughout the day. From his house, he could track the donkey's progress, could know without looking that work was being done, that all was well in his orderly world. When the sound grew distant, he smiled, knowing his faithful worker was delivering goods to the far hills. When it grew closer, he felt satisfied that another task was being completed. But what happens when that sound stops? What happens when the music pauses, even for a moment? The donkey began to discover this in small, troubling ways. When he paused to rest under a shady tree, as he had done countless times before, the silence of the bell now seemed to echo louder than its song ever had. Within moments, he would hear his owner's voice calling from across the field, not harsh, but with a note of concern, of expectation. "Everything all right?" The man would ask, but underneath those words, the donkey heard something else. "Why has the music stopped?" The Buddha spoke of how our suffering often begins not with dramatic events, but with these subtle shifts in our relationship to pleasure and pain, to praise and blame. Our donkey friend was experiencing what we might call the tyranny of positive expectations. The bell that had once represented freedom of recognition now began to represent the obligation to continue earning that recognition, moment by moment, chime by chime. He noticed that his rest periods grew shorter, not because anyone explicitly told him they should, but because the silence felt wrong somehow, felt like a betrayal of the trust that had been placed in him. The sweet moments he used to spend watching clouds drift across the sky, or feeling the cool earth beneath his body during the heat of midday became tinged with anxiety. Was someone listening? Was someone wondering why the bell had stopped singing? The children who once delighted in his presence now seemed to expect the show, the performance of being the special donkey with the golden bell. When he moved too slowly, or when the bell's song became muted by his fatigue, he caught glimpses of disappointment in their young faces. He had become not just a working animal, but a symbol, an icon, and symbols must always live up to their reputation. His body began to feel the strain in new ways. The same loads that he had carried with steady strength now seemed to demand more from him, because each step needed to ring clearly, needed to announce his continuing worthiness. His breathing became shallower, not just from physical exertion, but from the constant tension of maintaining his identity as the tireless worker, the golden bell donkey, the one who never faltered. Sleep became more difficult. Even in his stall at night, he found himself listening for the subtle sounds that might indicate someone was assessing his performance. Had he worked hard enough today? Had the bell sung brightly enough? Would tomorrow bring another test of his worthiness? The most painful part, though, was how he began to lose touch with the simple joy that had once motivated his service. Where once he had worked from a natural flowing of generosity, now he worked from a fear of losing his special status. Where once he had carried loads because helping others felt good in his heart, now he carried them because not carrying them might mean losing the recognition that had become as necessary to him as water or grain. The Buddha taught about dukkha, the fundamental dissatisfaction that arises when we attach our sense of self to external conditions. Our donkey friend was living this teaching, though he didn't have words for what was happening to him. He only knew that the golden bell, which had once made him feel so light, now felt like it was pulling him deeper and deeper into a kind of performance he couldn't escape. And yet, he couldn't imagine his life without it. The thought of going back to being unnoticed, unspecial, just another working animal in a world full of working animals, felt like a kind of death. So he kept walking, kept working, kept making the bell sing its golden song, even as his spirit grew quieter and quieter beneath the sound. The path ahead was growing steeper, dear friends, and our donkey friend didn't yet know that sometimes the very things we think are holding us up are actually wearing us down, one small step at a time. It was on one of those heavy afternoons when the sky wore gray clouds like a soft blanket, and the air held the promise of gentle rain, that our donkey friend encountered someone who would change the course of his story forever. He was walking slowly along the familiar dirt path, a sack of grain weighing heavily on his back, his breath coming in short, labored puffs. The golden bell, once so bright and musical, now chimed with a tired, muffled sound, as if it too was weary from the constant performance. From the pasture beside the road, an old ox watched this daily procession with eyes that had seen many seasons turn, many stories unfold, many creatures struggle with burdens both visible and invisible. This ox had worked these same fields for decades, had carried his own loads, had once worn his own version of the golden bell. His massive frame was still strong, but there was something in his bearing that spoke of deep wisdom, the kind that comes only from having traveled the full circle of attachment and release. As the donkey passed by, head hanging low, the ox could see something that perhaps no one else had noticed. Beneath the golden gleam of recognition, beneath the admiring glances of the villagers, there was a creature who was slowly disappearing into his own performance. The ox had seen this before, had lived this before, and his heart moved with compassion. With slow, deliberate steps, he approached the fence that separated them. "Brother," he called out, his voice deep and gentle like distant thunder rolling across summer hills. The donkey paused, startled to be addressed by someone who wasn't giving him an instruction or expecting him to move along quickly. "I have watched you walking this path day after day, night after night, without rest. All the villagers admire you, but tell me something." He paused, letting the silence settle between them like a soft blessing. "Do you listen to yourself?" The question hung in the air like the first drops of rain before a storm. The donkey found himself unable to respond, not because he didn't want to, but because the question reached into a place inside him that had been silent for so long he had forgotten it existed. When was the last time he had actually listened to his own heart, his own body, his own deepest knowing? When was the last time he had asked himself not what others needed from him, but what he needed for himself? The wise ox settled himself under the spreading branches of an old fig tree, and something in his presence invited the donkey to stop, to set down his burden for a moment, to rest in the shade of both the tree and this unexpected kindness. "I too carried loads," the ox continued, his voice carrying the weight of lived experience. "I too was useful, praised, needed. I too believed that I had to prove my worth every single day through the work I did, the service I provided. He looked out across the fields where he had spent so many years of his life, and his expression held both gratitude and a kind of gentle sadness. But I learned something, brother, though the learning came through great pain. I learned that if I don't stop to hear what my body is telling me, what my soul is crying out for, I will end up completely empty. Because you see, it's not just about being seen by others. It's about not losing yourself in the process of being useful. The donkey felt something shift inside his chest, something he couldn't name. It wasn't physical pain, though his body ached constantly these days. It was deeper than that, more fundamental. It was as if someone had spoken directly to a part of him that had been holding its breath for months, waiting to be acknowledged, waiting to be heard. The Buddha taught, the ox said softly, though he had never studied in any monastery, had learned his wisdom through the university of lived experience, that we suffer not because we work, not because we serve, but because we lose ourselves in the roles we play. When we become so identified with what we do that we forget who we are underneath it all, we begin to live in a kind of spiritual hunger that no amount of recognition can ever satisfy. The afternoon light filtered through the leaves above them, creating patterns of gold and shadow that danced gently across their resting forms. In this moment, the donkey felt something he hadn't experienced in months: peace. Not the peace of accomplishment or recognition, but the deeper peace of simply being present with another being who understood, who had walked this path, who had found a way through. As the first drops of rain began to fall, soft and cool against his tired back, the donkey realized that he couldn't remember the last time he had stopped to feel the rain, to appreciate the simple gift of water touching his skin. How long had it been since he had experienced anything without immediately calculating how it might affect his performance, his schedule, his image? The ox's question echoed in his mind as he eventually rose to continue his journey. Do you listen to yourself? It was such a simple question, yet it opened a door in his consciousness that had been locked for far too long. Perhaps, he thought as the golden bell chimed softly in the gentle rain, it was time to start listening. In the days that followed his encounter with the wise ox, our donkey friend found himself caught between two worlds. The old world of automatic service, where the golden bell dictated his worth, and his days moved with mechanical precision, and this new, barely audible voice that whispered questions he had never dared to ask. His body had been growing weaker for weeks, though he had pushed through the fatigue with the determination that had become his trademark. But now, for the first time, he began to actually notice the trembling in his legs, the shortness of his breath, the deep ache that had settled into his bones like winter cold. The morning when everything changed began like so many others. The sky was overcast, and the path from the recent rains had turned slippery and treacherous. He was carrying a particularly heavy load of wheat sacks, their weight pressing down on his back as he navigated the muddy trail that led up the hillside to the miller's house. Each step required careful placement. Each movement demanded more energy than his tired body wanted to give. The golden bell, tarnished now from constant use and weather, still chimed with each labored step, but its song had lost the bright clarity of those early days. It sounded more like a plea than a celebration, more like a cry for help than an announcement of competence. But as always, he pressed on, because stopping had become unthinkable, because the identity he had built around that bell was all he knew of himself anymore. It happened on a small incline, nothing dramatic, just a gentle slope that he had climbed hundreds of times before. His rear legs, weakened by months of overwork and depleted by his refusal to truly rest, simply gave way. One moment he was walking, the next his knees touched the earth, and then his whole body folded sideways, like a tent whose supports had suddenly snapped. The sacks scattered across the muddy ground, their contents spilling into the dark earth. But more significant than the scattered grain was the sound that followed, or rather, the absence of sound. The golden bell struck against a stone and fell silent, completely, utterly silent. For the first time in months, there was no chiming to mark his movements because he wasn't moving. He lay there in the mud, his chest rising and falling with labored breaths, and discovered something extraordinary in that silence. Beneath the absence of the bell's song, he could hear his own heartbeat, fast and frightened but still steady. He could hear his own breathing, ragged but real. He could hear, perhaps for the first time in so long, the sound of his own existence separate from his performance. The villagers came running when they realized the music had stopped. His owner arrived shortly after, taking in the scene with a furrowed brow. The fallen animal, the scattered grain, the silent bell lying against the stones like a broken promise. There was no anger in the man's face, but there was something perhaps worse, disappointment mixed with resignation. Without speaking, he knelt and untied the golden bell from around the donkey's neck. The rope fell away easily, as if it had been waiting for this moment of release. "It's no use anymore," he murmured, holding the bell up to examine it. There was no crack, no damage to the metal itself, but something essential had been broken, something that couldn't be repaired with tools or skill. And then came the most profound abandonment our donkey friend had ever experienced. His owner walked away, the villagers dispersed, and he was left alone in the mud with no identity, no purpose, no role to fill. The golden bell that had defined him was gone, carried away like a costume after a play had ended. But here's what the Buddha knew about these moments of complete collapse, dear friends. Sometimes we must lose everything we think we are in order to discover who we actually are. Sometimes the most devastating losses become the doorways to the most essential freedoms. Lying there in the silence, no longer the special donkey, no longer the reliable worker, no longer anything but a tired creature resting in the earth, he began to experience something remarkable. Without the constant pressure to perform, without the endless need to justify his existence through productivity, he found himself simply breathing, simply being, simply alive in a way that had nothing to do with usefulness or recognition or golden bells. The rain began to fall again, washing the mud from his coat, and he didn't rush to seek shelter. He let it touch him, let it clean him, let it remind him that he was part of something much larger than his own small drama of attachment and loss. In that moment of complete surrender, when he had nothing left to prove and no identity left to maintain, he touched something that had been there all along, waiting beneath the noise of his striving. He touched his own essential nature, his own inherent worth, his own Buddha nature that needed no bell to announce its presence. Now, dear friends, you might be wondering how this ancient story of a donkey and his golden bell speaks to your own life, your own struggles with recognition and worth in our modern world. The truth is, we all carry golden bells of one kind or another. Perhaps yours is the notification sound on your phone that announces each like, each comment, each small validation that you matter. Perhaps it's the praise from your boss, the approval from your family, or the way people look at you when you've achieved something noteworthy. The Buddha's teaching here is both gentle and revolutionary. He's not saying that recognition is bad or that we shouldn't appreciate acknowledgement when it comes. What he's pointing to is the subtle moment when appreciation becomes addiction, when healthy acknowledgement transforms into desperate need, when we begin to believe that we are only as valuable as our latest accomplishment, our most recent success, our ability to keep the bell ringing. This is what the Buddha called the second noble truth, the truth of how our suffering arises from attachment. We attach not just to obviously harmful things, but to beautiful things, good things, things that start as genuine gifts. The golden bell itself wasn't the problem. The problem was when the donkey began to believe that he was the bell, that his worth was measured by its sound, that his identity depended on its constant chiming. In our hyperconnected world, this teaching feels more relevant than ever. We live in a culture that often treats human beings like productivity machines, where our value seems determined by our output, our efficiency, our ability to perform consistently. But the Buddha reminds us through this simple story that beneath all our roles and achievements and golden bells, there exists something unchanging, something inherently valuable, something that needs no external validation to prove its worth. Your Buddha nature doesn't need a LinkedIn update to exist. Your inherent value doesn't depend on your last performance review. Your essential self is already complete, already whole, already enough, whether the world notices or not. This is the profound freedom that our donkey friend discovered in that muddy field. And it's the same freedom that awaits each of us when we're ready to gently set down our golden bells and remember who we were before we learned to perform for love. And so, dear friends, as our story draws to a close and the evening light begins to fade into that soft darkness that invites rest and reflection, I invite you to settle even more deeply into this quiet space we've created together. Perhaps you can feel your own body relaxing now, the way our donkey friend finally learned to rest in that muddy field, no longer carrying the weight of proving his worth to the world. Take a moment now to place your hand gently over your heart and feel the steady rhythm there. This heartbeat has been with you since before you achieved anything, before you earned any recognition, before you wore any golden bells. It beats not because you are productive or successful or admired, but simply because you are alive. This is the sound of your inherent worth, your Buddha nature, constant and unwavering. Now, in the spirit of the wise ox who asked that transformative question, I invite you to ask yourself with the same gentle curiosity, what golden bells am I carrying? What sounds have I become convinced I need to make in order to be valued? Is it the constant buzz of notifications that makes me feel important? The approval in someone's voice when they praise my work? The feeling of being needed, perhaps even indispensable, There's no judgment here, no need to immediately drop anything or change anything. Simply notice, the way you might notice clouds drifting across the sky. What would it feel like to be quiet for a moment? What would it feel like to pause without immediately explaining yourself or justifying the silence? If you feel comfortable, let your breathing become a little slower, a little deeper. With each exhale, imagine setting down some small weight you've been carrying, some small performance you've been maintaining. You don't have to give up your work or your relationships or your responsibilities. But perhaps, just for this moment, you can let yourself exist without having to prove that existence is worthwhile. Here's a gentle question to carry with you as you move back into your daily life. When do you feel most valuable as a person? Is it when you're doing something, achieving something, being praised for something? Or can you find that value in the quiet moments too, in the spaces between accomplishments, in the simple fact of your breathing, your awareness, your capacity to love and be loved? And here's another invitation. How might your service to others change if it came not from a need to prove your worth, but from an overflow of knowing that you are already whole? How might your work feel different if it arose from joy rather than from the fear of not being enough? The Buddha taught that compassion begins with ourselves, and so as you continue on your own journey, may you treat yourself with the same kindness you would offer to our tired donkey friend. May you recognize when you're pushing too hard, when the bell has become too heavy, when it's time to rest not because you've earned it, but because rest is part of the natural rhythm of all living things. Our donkey friend eventually learned to walk again, but differently, this time quietly, without the constant chiming that had once defined his days. He discovered that his steps could be meaningful even when they made no sound, that his heart could be full even when no one was watching, that his value existed in realms far deeper than any golden bell could ever reach. And the same is true for you, dear friend. Your Buddha nature shines whether you're achieving or resting, whether you're being praised or forgotten, whether your bell is ringing or beautifully, peacefully silent. In this knowing, may you find the deepest rest, the most profound peace, and the gentle courage to be exactly who you are, golden bell or no golden bell. May all beings be free from the suffering of attachment. May all beings rest in the knowledge of their inherent worth. And may you sleep tonight in the embrace of this ancient wisdom, knowing that you are enough, exactly as you are in this very moment. With loving kindness, until we meet again on this path of awakening.